All right, I think we're ready to go. Thanks, everybody. So welcome and thank you for joining us for the 2022 webinar, Disability Justice for Individual Artists, CAP, SNAP Solution. I'm Sherilyn Seeley, the Senior Program Manager for Grant Makers in the Arts. I'm wearing a white dress with lots of colors on the dress, pearl earrings. Also, as you continue to come in, you might notice that your name comes up as Sherilyn, my name. There was just a little issue with the link, so just right away, you can go ahead and change your name to your actual name, not mine. Thanks for your flexibility, but I assure you, you are in the right place. So before we begin our 60-minute webinar, please take a minute to review the Zoom features so that you have an optimal experience with us today. As you can see here, if you would like your experience today to include captioning, you should be able to select the closed caption or CC feature in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. So let me open it up here. You should be able to click show subtitles. I'm not seeing it right now, but it should be on your end. The caption, okay. All right, so no, it's not able to. Okay, so we'll make sure that happens. Our web and knowledge manager, Steve, will help us with that to make sure that that's taken care of before we start. We are also recording the webinar, so we'll have that after, but we will work on that. Thank you, attendees, for letting us know. Again, feel free to change your name in your name box, but thank you for that. If you have a question for the tech team during the webinar, you can feel free to use the chat function, like some of you already have, to let us know that you weren't able to access the closed captioning, and that's at the bottom of your screen. And if you have questions for the presenters as we go through the presentation, you can click on the Q&A, excuse me, the Q&A icon at the bottom of your in your toolbar. And so you can use that to ask panelist questions throughout the webinar and when we get to the Q&A section of today. So for starters, we would like to know what you're hoping to learn or take away from today's session. So we are going to post a poll up on your screen. Steve, if you could share that with us. Awesome, thank you. All right, so go ahead and let us know what you're hoping to learn or take away from today's session. And while you are doing that, I am going to give you an overview of what you can expect from today. So our latest webinar on disability justice was hosted in 2021. And it offered a well-rounded discussion on general best practices when funding and supporting artists with disabilities. Today, we're taking a closer look at how funders can support artists with disabilities while being mindful of how federal policies can impact that artist's ability to actually receive all of the funds that are due to them. So today, we are glad to have Alex Nock, principal of Penn Hill Group, Laura Poppiti, program director at Center for Cultural Innovation, and Reveca Torres, artist and also the founder and executive director of Backbones. The three presenters are going to share how they've been able to overcome federal policy challenges and how funders can better support individual artists with disabilities when policies get in the way. So I am going to drop a link into the chat so that you can access their bios if you're curious about learning more. There you go. And with that, we will turn it over to our presenters. Can we share the results of the poll before we dive in, Steve? Oh, lovely. Okay. And it looks okay, great. So if you look to the bottom of your screen, thank you. Thank you, Sherilyn. I'm not sure who this is specifically, but thank you. So we've been notified. You can now see your closed captioning options at the bottom where you see live transcript at the bottom of your screen. That's CC. You can go ahead and click that. All right. So I will kick it over to you, Reveca, to get us started.
Thank you. My name is Reveca Torres, and my visual description, I'm a Mexican-American woman with a brown skin, brown shoulder-length hair, and today I'm wearing a pink shirt, a pink t-shirt, and in my office with cabinets behind me. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this conversation. I am an artist, I'm a filmmaker, a disability advocate, and as you mentioned, also the executive director of a nonprofit called Backbones, which is serving people with spinal cord injuries and disabilities. I am a person with a disability, and I became disabled at the age of 13 in a car accident, and I've used a wheelchair ever since. And I've also required the assistance of caregivers or personal care attendants to live independently. Since I was 18, I have also been on Social Security income or Social Security disability income, on Medicare, Medicaid, SNAP, some sort of mixture of all of these or all of them at once. I have also been employed on and off and had income from different projects or fellowships or things like that. So when I was invited to speak about my experience as an artist with a disability, receiving grants, and how this has made an impact on my life, both personally and professionally, I just want to start off by saying that I had to think twice about it, because this has been something I wasn't sure that I wanted to talk about it, because it's something that has caused a lot of stress and anxiety for me in the past couple of years. But I also feel like it's something that's very important that I share my experience, because my story is not unique at all. You know, this is something that happens to thousands of Americans with disabilities that experience something similar to what I have and I have experienced. And it's something that, you know, needs to change, and we need to talk about it. And so, like I said, I'm happy to be here and doing that today. Let me see if I don't, oh, there we go. So in 2018, I was part of a residency with 3 Arts, which is an organization in Chicago that supports artists with disabilities, women and BIPOC artists. And this residency, along with others prior to that too, led me to have some opportunities to show my work and to receive some funding for my projects. And this also, these 2 experiences also led me to be able to have an exhibition in September of 2019. And so all of these things leading to that, to these opportunities were also important to me and to my work, getting some visibility, my artwork, and also being recognized as a real professional artist, which is very important. And I felt like there was some momentum going, and in 2020, I received 3 different awards for my work. I received a Hulu Cartemquin Accelerator. I was accepted into the Hulu Cartemquin Accelerator program, which is a program that offers mentorship and production funds for filmmakers of color. And that was at the beginning of the year. And then in the summer, I was a 3 Arts awardee, and we came with some unrestricted funds. And then in the fall, I was awarded the Craig Nielsen Visionary Prize, which also came with unrestricted funds. I was super excited, but equally nervous and scared about what this was going to mean for my benefits or for my government supports. And so as they were telling me, you won this award, I'm smiling, I'm saying, oh my God, thanks, I can't believe it. But really inside, I was like, oh crap, how am I going to make this work? And what am I going to do? And that's not what people should think when they get an award like this. You know, we should be happy about it, and we should be able to fully enjoy and to celebrate that you know, I had gotten these awards. And so And I'll back up a little bit too. A few years before this, I had been doing a lot of like reading books on finances and like how to, like women, finances for women and finances for Latinas as well, that, being paid less and stuff like that. So I was sort of like reading that stuff, and I knew that it wasn't applicable really for my situation for like my disability stuff, that I probably wouldn't find that information in those books. But I was so sick of being stuck and not being able to make money and declining jobs or projects that I was qualified to do and that I wanted to do. And so I was like, I'm gonna invite money and invite success into my life. This is what I was on a quest to do. And I was like, well, and I'll think about the consequences later. And I guess the result of that is that when you ask the universe for something, be prepared for it to answer, right? And so, when I did get these awards, then I was like, okay, well, what am I gonna do? And I felt a little bit lost. I felt alone, and this was a really unique situation, and it was really hard to find information about receiving grants, rather than like a lot of the information that's out there is about how to navigate employment, like having like a steady employment or getting income for employment. And so there was a lot of jargon, there was a lot of numbers, a lot of formulas, different government entities that they don't always work together, and they don't all have the same rules. And so this slide, if you can see all these terms that I just put on here, there's disability, there's Social Security, there's earned income, waivers, substantial gainful activity, assets, long-term services and supports, unearned income. And you look at this and it's really confusing, and you don't know what it means, and you don't know what they mean in relation to each other. And so it became very, very complicated. I tried to find lawyers who could help, that weren't very helpful because they didn't know, like myself, and a lot of people didn't know. And I was scared to reach out to like Social Security or to reach out to Medicare directly, for fear that, by just providing this information, that I was going to get these awards, that it would jeopardize my benefits. So finally, after months and months of trying to get information from this team of lawyers, they came back and they presented me with information that I already knew, that I could find online. And so I lost a lot of time, trying to find someone who knew how to help me. I finally found a lawyer who had worked with someone before, another artist with a disability, with a similar thing. She had gotten a grant, and so she was able to help me, and she answered some questions. And then we brought on an additional lawyer for, to learn about, this was a Social Security lawyer. She brought someone in who was more knowledgeable on like the Medicaid side of it, and then an accountant. And so basically we ended up assembling a team of people to help me figure all this out. And still it was complicated. But then now I also had legal fees, right? I had legal fees, and I had and accounting fees. So that was a thing. Let me go next. And so, and in this slide, I sort of have, the upper section and the lower section, and I put this up here so that we can see, I'm considered permanently disabled, but there's like the definition is like, if you're employed, then I guess you're not considered disabled. Sometimes I would get letters saying we're going to assess if you're still disabled, which I am. But whether I'm employed or not, I still am disabled. And so some of the things that they say that you can have one house, one car, you cannot exceed some asset limits if you're on Medicaid, you cannot exceed income limits on Social Security, and every I think for Medicaid, it's like every state is different. I believe in Illinois, the asset limit is 17,000. And then there's income limits for Social Security, which I believe right now are at like 1,300 or so, something like that. And then marriage, if you're married, that can also impact your benefits. And so, and then thinking, okay, well, if I have to pay for all of these things out of pocket as well, my personal care attendants, my home health people, and finding home health or health insurance, which often don't cover me having a caregiver, which is, which is my biggest concern really, is that I be able to have access to have caregivers or personal care assistants to help me get out of bed, to help me be independent in my life. It feels sometimes where like you have to pick one or the other, and it can be very, you can feel stuck. So let me go to the next slide. And I hope that this slide confuses you a little bit, because it's very confusing to understand this information. And this is just the surface of it. And so I want to talk about some of the things that come along with this, right? There's fear in not knowing the information, but also fear of losing these supports that we need for living. There's shame around this. A lot of times people say very negative things about people that are on government supports. There's frustration in not understanding how all of this works and how to navigate these systems. Similar confusion, and then the stigma as well. And so these are all strong words, but I think a lot of people with disabilities might feel them in regards to navigating all of this. And so how does receiving a grant or income impact an artist with a disability who utilizes government supports to live? And I think for me, it was, one large sum that was coming in that could basically have me get kicked off of these benefits that I needed, or Medicaid and Social Security. But I also learned that sometimes grants can be considered unearned income. And, I was advised to put it in different, and I'll talk about some of the solutions we came up with in a bit. But at one point I was told, well, once you get it, then, just go ahead and spend it, so it's not in your account, and just like all these different, a lot of just misinformation sometimes too. So, it impacts, I guess the biggest impact is that I could have been kicked off of these benefits that I needed. And also, finding that information that I needed, a lot of my, if I was able to be kicked off of them, then would I need to use my grant money that was maybe for arts or something to just survive? Working with these lawyers made me feel more at ease after months of, frustration and months of anger and crying, and sometimes even considering declining these grants because I didn't know what to do. So then they helped me reach a couple solutions. So again, finding legal help, and this says solutions, but not really, because I don't think that they are true solutions to the problem. But I was able to, like I said, work with the lawyers and finding legal help. However, that did fall on me. I had to go find these people that were knowledgeable, which was very, very hard to do. And if you're someone who, doesn't have, isn't savvy to do that research, it's hard to find too. Also, my grant could have been for $5,000 or it could have been for $1 million. The issue is the same, regardless of how much grant money I would get. And if I had to use all that money for legal fees at the end, like, you don't have your grant anymore, the benefits specialist, I mentioned it yesterday, or not yesterday, earlier, that sometimes it's hard to find them and it's hard to navigate. And then a lot of times people don't trust. And I'll say that for myself. I initially was like hesitant to share my information with them because sometimes they are working as part of these agencies. So there's some of that trust there as well. There's special needs trust, which you can put your funds in there, but often you have to have someone manage that, which means you don't have full autonomy of your own funds. And depending on the type of trust, once you die, they are able to take those funds back for like payback, I believe. And then there's ABLE accounts, which allow you to have to put in up to 15 or 16 maybe now per year. And then there's like a cap over, overall as well. And then I was able to work out also some flexible payment schedules. Instead of getting it all at one time, it was over different payments or through a fiscal sponsor. But I can talk about this all day, and this is just a surface overview of my experience. And like I mentioned before, I'm not unique. A lot of people go through this and are frustrated by this. And funders and programmers have good intentions, and I hope that they continue to support artists with disabilities, but it's important that we're aware of the issues that can arise. And with that, I will throw it over to Laura from Center of Cultural Innovation. And Laura and I have worked together in the past, and I think she's going to talk a little bit about the funder programmer side. So thank you.
Oh, thanks, Rebecca. That was awesome. It's so important to hear, your perspectives and your experience from the artists themselves. And now I'm going to come in and give you this very dry funder perspective. As Rebecca said, we worked together on the SCI Artist Innovator Fund, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. And Rebecca was really, well, we were fortunate to work with Rebecca. She informed the design of the program and led both cycles that we offered, and also had the not so easy task of getting the word out about the program on a national scale. But let me just introduce myself again. Laura Poppiti, Program Director at Center for Cultural Innovation. CCI is a national regranting intermediary with a focus on individual artists and arts workers. I'm zooming in from unceded Patwin land, otherwise known as Vallejo, California. And I'm a white woman of Italian descent. I have dark hair. I think my eyes are hazel today. And I'm wearing a marigold colored dress. Yeah, that's the color. And a green beaded necklace. Okay. Before I tell you about how we supported artists with disabilities through the SCI Fund, I think it's important to share some of the findings that emerged from our research and design phase, as these were really influential in how we thought about the program. Okay, there we go. First, statistics show that self-employment rates in the US are higher among disabled people than non-disabled people. And I'm citing a 2021 stat from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, but this has been a consistent trend for several years, including when we did R&D in 2017 and 2018. Our next finding was that even in a healthy economy, so pandemic aside, there's limited funding dedicated to developing entrepreneurial capabilities of disabled artists that would provide pathways for financial independence. So even though people with disabilities are more likely to be self-employed, there aren't many financial or policy avenues that support their entrepreneurship. And then there's an assumption that disabled people are driven to become creative entrepreneurs primarily as a result of barriers in other sections of the workforce. So it's this set of conditions that informed our design and framing of the SCI Artist Innovator Fund, which challenges the assumption of creative entrepreneurs being driven by necessity. Instead, the fund recognizes that the spinal cord injury experience brings a unique perspective to innovation. And so with that said, we describe the fund as supporting individual artist entrepreneurs with SCI who are inspired to innovate by opportunity-based entrepreneurship. In other words, by the possibilities and benefits that are offered through the experience of a creative practice and living with a spinal cord injury. The fund, excuse me, the fund was offered in 2019 and again in summer 2021. Each cycle awarded 10 grants of $7,500 each to individual artist entrepreneurs with SCI across the United States. And some examples of supported projects were a wheelchair accessible tiny house for artist residencies where the housing is inaccessible. There was adaptable rain protection for wheelchair users and a virtual fitness platform tailored for people with SCI as another example. And the common threads across these projects and the others that were funded were their potential to create a positive social impact and the potential to be revenue generating. And then I would be remiss, and I think Reveca pointed to this funder, if I didn't acknowledge that both grant cycles were supported by the Craig H. Nielsen Foundation. So we'll shift gears now from what the program supported to how it provided support. In all CCI grant ephemera, we include information about fund disbursement, and the SCI Artist Innovator Fund is no different. Per the program's guidelines, we stated that this funding may be taxable. Grantees are advised to consult with an accountant or tax expert. It's pretty standard boilerplate. Then the guidelines go on to say, we understand that fund disbursement may impact disability-related community supports, and CCI is willing to work with grantees on an individual basis to determine best options. So let's talk about this last sentence, the sentence in bold font, and the considerations that it lifts up. Impact on disability-related community supports. Because the income and asset limits are so austere for individuals with disabilities, receiving a grant payment of $7,500 could put the recipient's benefits or services that they're receiving at risk of being temporarily interrupted or permanently discontinued. And then individual basis. We talk about working with grantees on an individual basis because there's no one-size-fits-all method to fund disbursement when the recipients are receiving social benefits. Each individual brings their own set of financial circumstances, and each needs a customized strategy in kind. And this will be reminiscent of some of the things that Reveca spoke about. In order to disperse funds to grantees in a way that wouldn't jeopardize their benefits, we got a legal opinion on available options. And I'm going to go over these options, but they should in no way be thought of as solutions, hence the strike through of the word solution. These are band-aids or workarounds because the requirements associated with disability benefits are a structural barrier that keep recipients from accessing a living wage. So per our attorney, these were the options that were recommended when working with grantees. In some cases, we entered into the grant agreement with an intermediary, such as the grantee's fiscal sponsor, their own 501c3 nonprofit, or their business. In other cases, we worked with the grantee to build a custom payment plan. Sometimes this meant dispersing the $7,500 grant in as few as 3 payments, while other plans paid out the grant in as many as 13 payments. However, neither of these options were viable for one grantee who we worked with. This individual didn't have another entity to receive the grant funds through, and they couldn't receive more than $85 a month in income. So for this individual, we offered the option of direct purchases, in which case the grantee could have their vendor directly invoice CCI for goods and services up to the grant amount. Since CCI would be paying the vendor directly, the grant funds would never hit the grantee's bank account. And in this particular case, the items and services that CCI was purchasing weren't food, shelter, or liquid assets, all of which count as income. The other option offered to this grantee was to deposit the award into an Achieving Better Life Experiences account, which the grantee would have to set up. And I won't go too deeply into this because I know Alex will be talking about these, but suffice it to say that these are savings accounts for certain individuals with disabilities that can be funded by third parties like CCI. Up to $16,000 can be contributed into a person's ABLE account in a single tax year. And in most circumstances, the funds in an ABLE account don't count towards your income or asset limits for most government programs. But going back to my earlier point about one-size-fits-all approaches, ABLE didn't end up being a viable option. To be eligible, the onset of the individual's disability must have occurred before age 26, which didn't apply to the grantee who we were working with. So given this, we ended up doing the direct purchase option. So from our experience with these two cycles, we have, of course, the requisite recommendations to share. And the first is to be explicit. We learned that there were many would-be applicants to the SCI Artist Innovator Fund, and they were would-be because these were individuals who were eligible to apply and who would have been competitive. However, because disability-related supports are so restrictive regarding income and resource limits, there were many individuals who wouldn't even apply because of the perceived risk to their benefits should they be awarded funds. For this reason, we recommend that funders are explicit about their flexibility around payment options. And we know that a lot of you are already flexible. You just have to be explicit about this in your public-facing communications and explicit about your ability to work one-on-one with grantees. On our end, this didn't take a lot of time, and we certainly didn't need a whole new staff person. It's also important for the community to know at the front end that the funder has the flexibility and the will to work with each grantee individually. We also recommend that you seek expertise and/or offer the expertise of others to your grantees. So the first is a no-brainer. Consult with the community around program design. Funders, we often look to a program's intended beneficiaries for insights on how to effectively offer the program itself. In addition to that, we can look to the community's expertise for developing legible messaging and communications, especially when there's factors at play that discourage rather than encourage applications to your program. We also recommend contracting with an attorney who specializes in disability benefits. Having any attorney is a great start, but one who focuses on disability benefits has the specialized expertise that you'll need to come up with creative recommendations. And for those who have an in-house attorney, we know that they're there to mitigate the institution's risk and not necessarily to get the awarded funds to grantees. So this may be an occasion to get outside counsel or to work with an intermediary that can get the legal opinion of someone who will work for the grantee's best interests and not the institution's. And Reveca had talked about working with a team of advisors. So similarly, we recommend that potentially you'll need to contract with other experts to provide those supports to your grantees. And going back to the ABLE account as an example, if it had been a viable option, we would have needed a benefits counselor to advise the grantee on their eligibility for the program and any impacts on other programs they participate in. We would have also wanted a financial counselor to help the grantee to select an investment option for their savings, which in California, ABLE account holders can choose from one of 4 investment options. And the assumption here, of course, is that the account holder has a certain degree of financial literacy to make that informed choice. And then similarly, as far as others, you might need a CPA, a corporate attorney, or a trust attorney. For our last recommendation, we recommend that you support the levers of change. Payment plans, explicit communications, and outside counsel are great, but they'll only take us so far. To effectively improve the financial conditions of individuals with disabilities, there needs to be a change in federal policy so that people with disabilities are no longer penalized from earning income. So with that, I'll turn it over to Alex.
Thank you, Laura. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alex Nock. I am a middle-aged white male with, I prefer to think of my hair as salt and pepper, but I think it's got a little more salt than it used to have in terms of pepper, and it's close cropped. I'm wearing a blue dress shirt, and I'm in my office with windows behind me. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what's going on in the congressional policy landscape, so federally. My first slide here it has a blue header and has some bulleted text with a very non-artistically drawn picture of the U.S. Capitol there. Someone else might disagree with that, but so I think the big picture here is, and I definitely appreciate, Laura and Reveca, your comment about these are not solutions, but workarounds, recommendations, Band-Aids. I think Laura used the term Band-Aid. I think that's a really good explanation here. I mean, first, Congress really struggles to pass legislation in the big picture that's not directly tied to government operations. So the one thing that Congress has to do, even has to, can sometimes be late, can take a while, can be fraught with some ups and downs, is pass a budget each year that actually funds the government agencies and programs that impact everyday people and everyday lives, whether it be a U.S. Department of Education program to get a Pell Grant, whether it be something at the Housing and Urban Development Department to provide rental assistance, whether it be an environmental program from EPA. All that comes from annual congressional action. And that's something that typically takes a while. It's often 4 to 5 to 6 to 7 months late in terms of when it gets done. So the big picture here is that Congress struggles at this moment in time to kind of pass legislation in a lot of ways. There has been, though, some success around moderate issue specific bills. And Laura, you hit upon one of them. It's a couple years old now, but the ABLE Act, and by no means I'm not going to say it's some sort of perfect solution that solved all problems for individuals with disabilities looking to finance certain things, but it was an example of an issue specific bill that got bipartisan support that actually took, I want to say, 4 to 6 years to actually get Congress to, from when they introduced it to when it actually became law. But there is the hope and kind of focus on that Congress can address specific issues when they're confronted with the facts. And I would say that this area of what sort of assets and income that individuals with disabilities can have while also not jeopardizing, Reveca, you said, your government provided benefits, whether it be SSI, whether it be Medicaid, whatever it might be. That's something that more policymakers are becoming keenly aware of. It was not an issue in front of a lot of members of Congress. Whether that's wrong or right, it just was the situation in terms of that. So the one example that GIA has focused some on, and that I'm going to spend some time on today, is the Asset Act. And this is a bill that was introduced by Senator Coons and Sherrod Brown. Senator Coons is a Democrat from Delaware. Sherrod Brown's a Democrat from Ohio. There's what we call, they're both members of the United States Senate. There is a House companion bill, so that means the same bill's been introduced in the U.S. House of Representatives by Jimmy Gomez, who is a member of Congress, a Democrat from the Los Angeles area. And essentially what this bill is trying to deal with is the asset limits for receiving supplemental security income, or SSI. They haven't been raised since 1989. And what the bill proposes to do is raise the limits from $2,000 to $10,000 for an individual, or $3,000 to $20,000 for a couple. And probably most importantly, this is something the Act doesn't now, is it indexes these thresholds to inflation. So you can quickly set an income level, and we can argue whether those are the right income levels or not, right asset levels or not. You can quickly set an asset level that after 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years becomes outdated, especially in a time of more fast growing inflation, I guess, like we have now, than other times. So the indexing portion is particularly important as well. And what this essentially would allow individuals to do is they can have assets that would allow them to be supported in their lives and with their work at a higher level. So if a grant maker is looking to, provide resources to somebody, it may not come into conflict with them also being at risk of losing public supports like SSI. So this sort of legislation does actually present an opportunity for continued engagement on these issues. As Laura said and Reveca said, even this fix is a Band-Aid, a possibility, something that kind of would help around the margins. It's not a comprehensive proposal. It's not going to revolutionize the way individuals with disabilities can both feel secure in keeping their kind of publicly provided benefits, as well as being able to work and actually show their talents. But it does build upon the success, hopefully, of legislation in this area that's been enacted recently on a bipartisan basis. The ABLE Act, which Laura mentioned in her remarks, was something that received bipartisan support. Kathy McMorris Rodgers, in particular, who's a Republican from Washington State, was someone that championed this act in Congress. It had Democrats and Republicans supporting it. So hopefully the Asset Act is something that can also pick up on this and drive some relief and support towards individuals as well. So what does this actually mean, though? So there's this Asset Act out there, and great, a couple members of Congress have introduced it. It's competing with a lot of priorities. And Alex, you just said that Congress struggles to actually pass legislation. That's true, but when they understand it's a priority, when they're presented with facts and real life situations, you can spur activity and action. And the Asset Act is something that GIA members can engage their senators on. So there's two situations that many of you will find yourselves into. Let's talk about if you're able to lobby. So that means you have the ability to expend funds in a fashion that triggers lobbying disclosures on your 990, or that you have to file with the IRS. So that means you can speak directly to your senator or their staff and ask them to co-sponsor the Asset Act. So co-sponsoring is something when one member of Congress signs on and expresses their support for a piece of legislation. So Coons and Sherrod Brown are obviously on that bill now. They're the lead kind of authors of that bill. They need other members of Congress in the Senate to express their support directly as well. Again, Jimmy Gomez has that bill in the House, so other members of the House of Representatives can also sign. So you want to ask them to co-sponsor the Asset Act. If you're not able to lobby, it doesn't mean you can't do anything. It means you can talk about the issue. Reveca, I think, did a really great job of describing her individual situation. If you're aware of other people in her situation, or you just want to speak about the issue, you can talk to senators or representatives about the actual issue, what the asset limits are, what the income limits are, how it impacts individuals' lives and why it might matter to their constituency. You just can't say, hey, co-sponsor this bill or vote for this bill. That's a lobbying activity. But you can educate and actually talk about what this means to a segment of the population that you're particularly focused on in terms of supporting with your grant making. Just closing out, because advocacy is one thing. We support GIA and a lot of our other folks we work with here at Penn Hill Group. So we want to provide you some tips here. So if you are going to advocate for this, whether you can lobby, whether you can just educate about this, you really want to make sure that your senators and representatives are educated and aware about the issue. They need to know the scope of the issue and why it matters. Who does this affect? What opportunities does it limit the people? What opportunities are people that this affects by limited by not having something like the Asset Act become law? You really want to elevate local stories. So to the extent individuals are comfortable telling their story, and Reveca, thank you for coming out here and telling your story today. You know, I think it helps put you know, a name and a face on things, so people just don't read about it in a kind of abstract way, but they realize it affects people in everyday lives. Members of Congress react well to actual stories about constituents in their state or district. Wow, this is affecting Bob or Sue or Paul or Alex or Sherilyn or whoever, right? You know, about this, they understand it, you know, that there are real people out there that are in their districts, in their states, that have this particular issue or have this particular cause that can be helped by this bill. And whenever possible, talking about the impact of data. What does this really mean? If we're to talk about the Asset Act in particular, so what does it mean to raise the asset thresholds? What does that do? You know, do you know about particular instances where this would allow individuals to, you know, become, be employed or be, in a different financial situation without risking their public benefits? What does it mean if an individual is putting their public benefits at risk in terms of what costs they might experience if they're not being supported by public benefits? All these things are important. They don't necessarily have to be hard numbers, but they have to have a data-driven mentality as part of it. And Sherilyn, I think that was my last slide, so I'm throwing it back to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Alex. Thank you, everyone, for your presentations. So this is the contact information of our presenters if you want to follow up with them after the webinar is over. But thankfully, there is still some time for questions to them. And I just want to acknowledge one thing in the chat. Someone asked about a $2,000 to $10,000 amount. And so Erin, who also works with Penn Hill Group, has responded in the chat if you were curious about that. So backing up a bit, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see there we go. You'll see a Q&A icon. You can click that and send us your questions and be specific about who the question is for. And so our first question, this question came up actually while you were presenting, Lara. Someone writes, grantees are advised to consult with an accountant or tax expert. I think that was like the bolded section. Why didn't the grant include that consulting support? Is it just kind of a matter of choice? Is it like, well, you know, you're better able to work with grantees on a case-by-case basis, depending on kind of how do you respond to that?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think aspirationally, as an intermediary, I think we would love to offer those services to all grantees across our programs, SCI or not, because everyone brings their own individual set of circumstances. I think with this program in particular, I think the idea was, the sentiment was, CCI can't provide, legal or tax advice to you, so you might seek that out. But I think from what we've learned in the past and what we're trying to carve out in future cycles is to bring those resources in at the front end to offer to individuals so they know that it's available.
That's great. Thank you so much for that, Lara. I'm going to kick it over to you, Reveca. And once again, Reveca, thanks for being here today and sharing. I know this is like, you're putting yourself in a very vulnerable place, just kind of sharing what's been going on. So really, really appreciate it. So my question for you is, we heard previously that there were a lot of people who were going to apply for the program that Lara was talking about, and they were kind of like, would have applied, would be, applicants. And sometimes artists tend to kind of like shy away a little bit, artists with disabilities specifically shy away a little bit because of the risks of losing some of their grant funding. So how can funders encourage more artists with disabilities to apply to their programs?
Well, I think Laura touched on this a little bit. It's just like being transparent that that will work with you, or, you know, you're welcome to apply. And, you know, we know there might be some issues around this, and we're willing to talk about this and figure it out together. I think that's a start. I know, you know, if I were to see that on an application, I would be like, okay, well, I know I'm going to have issues maybe, but at least they're open to working with me and working with my situation. I think that is at least the very first step. And then, you know, being prepared for that, having that knowledge, you know, like consulting with someone with legal background, or with an accountant or financial advisors that that might know on the topics, because it's really frustrating to talk to someone and then like expecting to get answers and not, you know, like I mentioned, running around for like 6 months trying to find that from like people who I thought would have answers. So if you're a funder, you know, being prepared with someone who will have that knowledge that you can direct people to.
That's right. Thanks, Rebecca. And before you go back on mute, someone named Sherilyn sent us a question saying, you know, if we want to check out Rebecca's work, where can we do so? And we will include Rebecca in our other presenters' emails at the end, where you can reach out directly. But is there somewhere else that you want to direct people to right now?
Yeah, my personal website is revecatorres.com. And then Backbones is backbonesonline.com.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just typed it in all caps in the chat, so you can copy and paste that. Great, thank you, Rebecca. I'm gonna kick it over to you, Alex. And this is about funders getting a little, excuse the clock in the background if you can hear it, but it's about funders getting a little bit more involved with the lobbying and advocacy side of this. And so how can a funder check whether or not their Congress member or senator is signed on to the bill, the Asset Act?
So,
and how can the funder encourage their member to support the Asset Act?
sure. So one of the great things about Congress is a lot of their information is transparent and easy to find. So the main website to look up all bills regarding Congress, and the official site that Congress updates before all the unofficial sites update their sites, is congress.gov. I know that was pretty fancy website there, but glad they got that URL a long time ago. So that's the place to go, and you can look up the bill and see who's a co-sponsor and who's not. You know, with your actual grantees, you know, part of it is probably what sort of resources that they might have either independently or from your grant. You know, Reveca, just when she was mentioning how she was getting, I think Reveca used the term general operating support or things like that, right? You know, where it's resources from a grant maker that isn't encumbered by any rules around lobbying or non-lobbying. And part of that, as you know, Sherilyn, depends on what the grant maker can do with their own resources that they're giving out. So one is, as a grant maker, are you giving out general operating support? You know, that's a decision you can make or can't make. Are you able to do that? How do you do that? That sort of stuff. In terms of talking to your own members or your own grantees about something, I think presenting it with these two options. If a grantee is able to lobby and wants to lobby, there is option one, if you remember from that slide a couple slides ago, that says, hey, contact your member of Congress. If you go to congress.gov, you see they're not a co-sponsor of the Asset Act, contact them and say, hey, we would really like you to co-sponsor, and here's why. And think of the advocacy tips we talked about: local stories, data, you know, what it means for individuals in their districts or their state if you're talking to a senator. But if you don't lobby, you can educate people on this topic. You can talk about the actual impact. I mean, think about just the issue of Congress hasn't raised the asset limits since 1989. I mean, think how much hair I had in 1989. Like, you know, it was a totally different world, right? You know, I think that's an option too. So I think grant makers that can provide, hey, if you want to lobby, do this, But if you don't lobby, you can still help by educating people on the topic. So you're not, people often get caught up in like, oh, can I talk to a member of Congress? You can educate them, or their staff, of course, on the issue, and you're not going to run afoul of any IRS lobbying rules at all.
That's great. Thank you, Alex, for that. I'm going to kick it over to you, Laura. So if someone represents a small family foundation or even intermediary with very limited capacity, what are some of your thoughts or recommendations on how that organization or funder can offer resources or expertise to grantees on a smaller scale?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this because, CCI is relatively small.
Right.
And I think we saw, I say during the pandemic as if it's past, but right at the top of the pandemic, and since a lot of funders coming together and collaborating on joint efforts and initiatives to get relief assistance to individuals and organizations, et cetera. So I was thinking that, a pooled effort of some sort where you can still enact your values and influence the design, et cetera, and get at, what we described, those resources that you want to provide the targeted beneficiaries. I saw Ted is in the chat. I mean, the Rainin Foundation in the Bay Area in Oakland did an incredible job raising funds for COVID relief and organizing several funder collaboratives. So I think where there's a will, there's a way.
Sure, of course. Thank you, Laura. I appreciate that. And that was very encouraging. Where there's a will, there's a way, and that's true. I believe that. For our last question, I'm gonna ask you, Reveca, to bring us home. What are other considerations to think about for all of the funders on the line today in the webinar when supporting artists with disabilities? Any kind of final thoughts?
I'm not crying. I just got something in my eye.
If you were, it wouldn't be a big deal either.
I think, like I mentioned earlier, is this is a lot of confusing information, and I hope it should not be discouraging for you to be like, oh, I'm not even gonna go into helping artists or supporting artists with disabilities. It's not, I don't want it to be discouraging or confusing or scary or daunting, because we need your help to make change. And if we don't talk about this, if we don't start looking for solutions, things aren't going to change, and people are going to stay quiet and silent about it. And so I hope that this is just a jumping point for funders to think about ways that they can make change and that they can support artists of all abilities, and step up and help and do something.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much for those final words, Reveca. And thank you to all of our presenters for being here today on our webinar. I'm seeing some really positive feedback in the chat where folks have gotten a lot out of this and felt like what you all shared was very informative. So thank you. On your screen right now, you'll see that there is contact information for our presenters. We will also be sending out a recording and a PDF of the slide deck. So you'll have their contact information. You can follow up with them with direct questions. I've also just dropped into the chat a survey, so you can let us know what you thought of the webinar, give us some feedback so that we can keep putting together programming that you all want. And finally, like Reveca and the rest of our presenters said, let's keep the conversation going, keep talking about it so that we can see change and have actual solutions, not just Band-Aids, and reimagine the future of philanthropy. If you have any further questions, you can reach out to me, the real Sherilyn Seeley, Sherilyn@giarts.org. And thank you again for joining us. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.